Rise up!
This is the Rise Up See Red podcast, all about the Arizona Cardinals and the NFL, featuring insider and outsider perspectives. Enjoy the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Now here are your hosts, Jess Root and Seth Cox.
Hello, Arizona Cardinals fans, and welcome to the latest edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. I'm your host, Jess Root from CardsWire.com, USA Today's NFL Wire site that covers the Arizona Cardinals. And for our third show of the week, it is week 4. It is the second preview show. Seth Cox from RevengeOfTheBirds.com, SB Nation's Arizona Cardinals site. He and I have our preview picks and predictions and prop bets, all of the P's. Seth, we are getting ready. Hey, for fun, hallelujah, or at least for me, for my underdog picks, as I picked the Giants to cover this game. Hallelujah for that missed field goal at the end of the game. That made me happy.
Yeah, it was.
They kept them minus. Well, I got them at -6, but it was plus 5.5 by the time the game started, and they lost by 5.
Yeah, and it's just one of those things too you look at, right? Like that game was kind of what we expected, and I don't know if you saw the stat, but Daniel Jones has never won a football game outside of Sundays. So Monday nights and Thursday nights, or if they played Friday or Saturday, that he's never won. So this was,
and Dak doesn't lose to the Giants, so
right.
But that's on the degenerate side of things. We've got the Cardinals and Commanders this weekend. If you listen to the show already, this is episode 596. Episode 595, I had Commanders Wire managing editor Brian Manning on. We talked about the Commanders. We talked about what they've done so far. Now we're going to get our perspective, Seth. What have you thought about the Commanders so far this season?
I mean, you look at what they've done, and it's been impressive. And, you know, it kind of speaks to what you and I had been referencing from the jump with Cliff Kingsbury, right? Like, offensively, he does a good job. He's able to create opportunities for players. You know, the biggest thing was always that he just didn't seem like the guy that could handle the whole being a head coach thing. He's not an authoritarian. He doesn't have the kind of cachet, if you would, to kind of command an offense and a defense, and all of that. But when you look at everything, this is one of those situations where they have a young quarterback in Jaden Daniels who he's having success with. And I mean, it's funny because the success is really interesting, right? 80.3% completion percentage, 664 yards, so about 220 yards a game. Only 2 touchdowns though,
and
right?
Those were both on Monday night.
But he's rushed for 171 yards and 3 touchdowns, so kind of Kyler-ish, right? Like doesn't take a lot of big opportunities, doesn't do a whole lot in terms of risk taking, but he does a good job of he and his team being in positions to win games. And hopefully that's, you know, kind of what the formula they contend with, because, you know, I think for the Cardinals, they'll be able to deal with that a little better than a guy that's a dynamic playmaker consistently, right?
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to watch. They haven't, the stat that everyone's been talking about is the fact that they haven't punted in their last 2 games. They've won 2 in a row. I'm going to, like, that was impressive. Monday night's win was impressive, but I am going to step back a little bit and take a look at those 2 wins. One was over the Giants. That's not that impressive. And the Bengals right now look kind of like a disaster. So while on the surface that looks like a good win, and what they've done offensively, frankly, is fine. They've had 15 possessions, I believe it is, over the last 2 games, and had maybe it's more. I think it was 15 possessions. They've had 3 kneel downs, 4 touchdowns, and 8 field goals. Yes, maybe that was it. And I think that the math works out like that. I looked at it, and I have it in an article somewhere, so hopefully got that right. But they've scored. They haven't punted. They haven't turned the ball over. They only have 3 kneel downs. Maybe it was 16 drives. There's another field goal in there. I don't know, but yeah, they've been finishing drives. They had 7 field goals against the. They had 7 field goals against the Giants. Obviously, Austin Siebert won that. Won the Special Teams Player of the Week, and Jane Daniels is coming off this week. So it's 16 possessions. It's 16 possessions, I believe. So we've got let me see, Siebert field goal. Maybe not. I don't remember. Okay. So 5 touchdowns and 8 field goals. 5 touchdowns, 8 field goals, 3 kneel downs. 16 drives over the last 16 possessions over the last 2 games. 3 were single play kneel downs that ended a half, and both at the end of the half and once at the end of the game on Monday night. But yeah, it's been this Washington team looks ahead of where you'd expect them to be, because Jaden Daniels has just been so careful with the football. He hasn't turned the ball over. He leads the NFL in completion percentage. He leads the NFL in lowest interception percentage, 0. And they've won 2 games in a row. So offensively, this is a team that they can do things. They've got a running game with Brian Robinson and Austin Eckler. Austin Eckler, kind of a do everything kind of guy,
but he's out. He's out
this game. That's him. That's really kind of critically important. They got Terry McLaurin, who we've known is a great receiver, very underrated. And then you've got Zach Ertz, who is productive. He's not like dominant, but and he'll probably end up with a 90 catch, 800 yard season if he stays healthy. If he stays healthy this year, because he loves playing for Cliff Kingsbury, and Cliff Kingsbury loves getting him the ball.
Well, and you mentioned it, right? The loss of Austin Eckler this week is huge because, and I'm not joking when I say this, he would be their leading receiver if he didn't get hurt during the game. He has 9 receptions for 121 yards. Terry McLaurin leads the team with 12 receptions for 139 yards. So, like, Eckler would 100% be the leading receiver if he had just not gotten hurt, because I think it happened in the second quarter of the last game. So
yeah,
he's basically played 2.5 games to everybody else's 3, and so
and has been great on special teams. He had a kickoff return for a touchdown called back. He had a big kickoff return as well. He's been very impactful for that team, and that's a big loss for them. But they kind of do things like we know what the Cliff Kingsbury offense can look like, and so it's going to be interesting to see how that goes. Now, defensively, that's a different beast, because they are 29th in yards. They are they are 31st in net yards per attempt in the passing game. They are 29th while they're in the middle of the pack in terms of rushing, but they're 29th in yards per attempt, as they allow 4.8 yards per attempt. This is where you look at this game, and where the Cardinals and the Lions did not match up well. Like, the Lions were a bad matchup for the Cardinals. Even with Washington's offense, this Washington team is not, if you look at it, they're not a bad matchup for the Cardinals, because the Cardinals should be able to run the ball. And if the Cardinals can run the ball, this is going to, and like at worst, like at best, the Cardinals blow them out of the water, or at worst, this is just a track meet. But I don't think that Washington's going to be able to slow the Cardinals offense unless there are turnovers. But other than that, because they don't have a guy on the edge that can win consistently. They're kind of like the Cardinals.
Yeah, this isn't the old
No
Commanders
Montez
skins.
Sweat, no Chase Young.
Yeah, and I mean even with the guys that they have,
Well,
that are
and
still
Cleveland Farrell,
here.
their sack leader, he's out. He won't play this weekend.
But even with the guys that they have, right, like that are still really good on the interior,
They've been bad.
they
They've not
have
been good.
not been good this year, and that's, it's disappointing, right? Like you look at that, and it is disappointing because that group, with Deron Payne, Jonathan Allen, a guy we love, Jerzon Newton, like those guys were special. Remember how good they were, man?
Oh my goodness, yes.
And now they're they seem like, and I don't want to, obviously jinx this, but so far they've been kind of Jags out there, like just guys like
and Newton is, he missed time in the offseason with the injuries. And so what Brian Manning said is that his role will increase and he'll probably be the replacement for one of those two guys moving forward. But we also know that Newton, what is he more? He's more of a big-bodied guy in the interior that will slow things as opposed to a dynamic, disruptor.
Yeah. And so it's one of those situations that you look at and you just enjoy when it's there because it goes away so quickly. And that's kind of one of the things that you look at with this reset for the Commanders is that they're not the same team, right? Like they're not that defense with attitude and they're trying to find their offense. In fact, they're kind of the inverse, right? You mentioned it, like 29th in yards versus 6th in yards offensively, 5th in points scored, 29th in points.
Well, you look at, they gave up 37 to the Bucks. They gave up 33 to the Bengals, and they had they gave up 18 to the Giants. But again, Giants cannot finish their drives. They haven't been able to do that.
Yeah,
and what they actually gave up were 3 touchdowns. It's just that they missed the extra point. The Giants missed their first extra point, and then they went for 2 on the other 2 times and failed. So they gave up 3 touchdowns to the Giants, and the only reason why basically they win that game is because of failed conversions afterwards.
Yeah, and so now we look at it and we see how this is going to break out. But this is, this is not your old school Washington team that we've been accustomed to. And even with Dan Quinn as the head coach, a defensive guy, right? This is a team that does not play good defense right now. And we'll see how that shakes out in this one.
Well, yeah, and so keys, if we're talking keys right now, what the Cardinals must do, I think number one is establish that run. If they establish the run, if they're picking up 3, 4, 5 yards, I think it's going to be a long day for the Washington offense. I mean, for the Washington defense, Washington in general. But it will come down, number one, if the Cardinals can do with the run game what they did against the Rams, I think they're going to find offensive success. And from there, there'll be plays in the passing game. And so the run game will open things up. They'll start with that. Start with the run game and then, let them cook, let Marv, do things, let Michael Wilson do things. It's going to be interesting because it's going to be a little bit different dynamic because it doesn't look like that. It actually doesn't look like that Trey McBride's going to be able to play in this game. And so that will be the thing that you need to know. Like Jamar Chase went off for six catches for 118 yards and 2 touchdowns. So that if you look at what Jamar did, so you can look at, okay, Cardinals boundary guys, you can see Marv having a big game. You could see Michael Wilson have a big game. So start with the run game, then attack the perimeters, but for their corners.
Yeah, and you should be able to do both with relative consistency, right? I mean, their rush defense it's middling, as you said. It is 29th in yards per attempt after giving up 5.1 right now, which is absurd. That's a lot of yards per rush. But the pass defense is it's literally the worst in the NFL. I mean, it's awful. And like you said, a lot of that comes with different situations and
they've given up 9 touchdown passes in 3 games.
Yeah, 9 touchdown passes, 3 games, as many interceptions as you and I have. They've given up 767 passing yards, which is over 250 passing yards per game. This is the wildest stat, though, Jess, to me. So they're 31st in yards and 31st in net yards per attempt, which takes into account, other things like sacks and stuff like that. They are 18th in attempts against. Like teams, they're just in the middle of the pack in terms of pass attempts they faced. They just literally can't stop anybody.
That's because they have the second worst yards per attempt in the passing game. So they're bad. Like the numbers, they're giving up 7.7 yards per attempt in the passing game. They're giving up 5.1 yards per attempt in the run game. That's not a recipe for success.
And the fact that they're 2-1 just kind of speaks to a couple of things,
yes.
Right?
Yeah, well, it won how good the offense was last week. And let's face it, the Bengals and the Giants. Well, the Giants, we know what the Giants aren't good. The Bengals are a mess right now. The Bengals don't make any sense around. They're 0-3. I don't know what's going on there, but the Cardinals, I think, are like, and we know about the Cliff Kingsbury offense. You make them one-dimensional, they can't push the ball down the field because they will go to the horizontal game, and it'll be rough. And so that's kind of like for me what the game plan is going to be. That said, no Justin Jones in the middle of the defense against that a run defense that is already up and down. They were great. They were great against the Rams. They were not so good against the Bills, and they were terrible against the Lions in the first half. So if Brian Robinson gets going a little bit, opening things up, like they've got, Zach Ertz will catch the ball, Terry McLaurin will catch. So they've got to. I'm going to put basically this on the offense. The offense needs to do what it needs to do because I think the defense, if the offense isn't humming, is going to give stuff up. And so they need to create some passing situations, get sacks, because Jaden Daniels has been sacked 9 times in 3 games. He's been sacked 3 times a game on average.
Yeah, so they've got a lot of opportunities to make plays on defense. They're going to have that a bunch, and now it's just about getting there, right? Like they've got to finish and get home, and we'll see how this team comes out and does things, because at the end of the day, this team's been a little Jekyll and Hyde offensively and defensively this season. So, and quite frankly, by halves, right?
Yeah. Yes, very much so. Very much so. Coming up next on the Rise of C-Word podcast, Best of Cardinals Talk on the web. Let's move on. Let's look at individual matchups. What do we like? What are going to be key in this game? That's coming next on Rise of C-Red. We're back on the Rise of C-Red podcast, Best of Cardinals Talk on the web. I think we're going to be looking primarily at some of the outside type things. Like number one, I'm looking at Sean Murphy-Bunting against Terry McLaurin. Now, the Commanders will move McLaurin a little bit more than the Cardinals moved around DeAndre Hopkins in that first season when Hopkins was there. And when I talked to Brian Manning, it was one of the reasons why that was. It was 2020. There was no off season. There were no off season reps, and so it was easy to just go give Hopkins in that year one. You're going to play the X, and as much as moving guys around for better matchups, when you have a guy like Hopkins who can line up the X and just win those one-on-ones, it's really hard to move him, because when you don't got other guys who can do the same thing, it changes things for the offense. And so primarily it will look like, if McLaurin's lined up on that left side, that's primarily what's going to be Sean Murphy Bunting. These Cardinals don't really have their corners travel. Murphy Bunting plays that side typically, with Star Thomas playing the other side and Garrett Williams in the slot. And so that's my first matchup that I want to pay attention to, is how Murphy Bunting does against McLaurin, who is honestly wouldn't you say he is probably I know Amon-Ra St. Brown's really good, but that's the consistency that McLaurin has had year after year after year. Wouldn't you say he's as tough as any receiver that they faced this year?
Yeah, he's a more consistent, guy. He hasn't had a great he hasn't had a lot of good quarterbacks throwing to him. You can ignore the 45 yards per game average. He's a big play threat all the time. And he's starting to get into a rhythm with Jaden Daniels, and we'll see that. I mean, 17, 22, and then 4 for 101. That was a big day. You look at what he's done, and you kind of mentioned it. He's unheralded, right? His rookie year, he had 919 yards receiving in 14 games. He hasn't had under 1,000 since then.
Correct.
Like, he's just a guy that continually puts up good numbers. He's a very good receiver that probably, was unfortunately wasted, because now he's, age 29 year and everything like that. But and he's going to end up having a really, really nice career, but he's a guy that'll never end up being what he could have been if maybe he was part of something else. But you can't take away from him what he has done and what he continues to do.
Yeah. Another matchup to watch is the opposite side. That would be Marvin Harrison, primarily against Benjamin St-Juste. St-Juste, who is has the size, is a guy that almost makes plays. So he looks like he's in position, but is not a big playmaker, which will be interesting to see, because they've had production, Kyler and Marv, but there's still work to be done, because they've had a few that should have been big play, and maybe we'll see them connect on a couple more.
Right, and that's the whole thing, is that with this group, and you hate to say it this in this structure, right? But with what we have seen thus far from the Commanders, this should be a day that all of their offense gets kind of healthy, right? Like, you look at their coverage snaps, Benjamin St-Juste is kind of their top guy, and he's, according to PFF, he's given up 15 receptions for 201 yards and 3 touchdowns. That's 100.
He's playing like Marco Wilson was before last season. He'd be there in position, so he's covering the guy, still make plays.
Right. And you look at it, I mean, that's their top guy. And I'm not trying to take shots. I'm just Mike Sanderstro, a guy we love coming out. He 11 receptions, 126 yards, 3 touchdowns, 146.6 quarterback rating against.
They get no pressure. That's the thing. They have no pass rush,
right,
at all.
No, so you look at it, it's bad. Emmanuel Forbes has been hurt, if I remember right.
Yeah, and he's been limited, so we'll see if he comes back. And the perception was fans aren't really thrilled about him coming back because he's no better. Yeah.
So you look at it, this is the ideal week, right? And then you have the Niners the next week. So you're like, okay, if we can get going and then get some rhythm and then put up a good game against the Niners in San Francisco, like you feel like you're trending in the right direction. But I will say this: I know how this, and knowing this team and this fan base too, but I know how this fan base works. If they lose this game, it's going to be the sky is falling.
Yes.
Like Chicken Little will be out immediately.
It totally will be.
So that's the other thing that you want to see.
I'm paying attention to Elijah Higgins against Bobby Wagner. Bobby Wagner still a very, very good player, but he's just, his coverage numbers are not good anymore. Like, he can make plays, but his plays are not around the line of scrimmage. Last year he gave up, he gave up a couple of touchdowns. He had 114.9 passer rating against. He's got a 97.3 passer rating against. And so it's going to be interesting to see how that goes. He hasn't got, I'm trying to look here. He's gotten his hand on one pass so far this season. And with McBride probably out, but this is the game where we can see, let's see Elijah Higgins be like that promising tight end, that Dan Arnold guy, that the up and coming, that we're like, if it weren't for Trey McBride, everyone would be slobbering over Elijah Higgins entering this year.
Yeah. And, I think they can have a big game. I love Bobby Wagner. He's probably a Hall of Famer, but he is not the same guy, right? 10 catches, 113 yards, a 105.9 passer rating against, and that's the best one. Like, that's the guy that's been the best in coverage. So it's been one of those things, like you said, a lot of it comes from the pass rush, right? You can't cover for that long when you can't get a pass rush. Looks like Kelvin Beacham's trending in the right direction.
Otherwise it'd be Charlie Heck. And if there were a week to have to go with Charlie Heck, I guess this would be the week to do it, right?
Right. So we'll see. But I mean, so far so good. You like what you've seen. And this should be a fun, kind of ideal matchup for this group.
Yeah. Any other matchups that you have your eye on for this game?
No, I mean, I think you nailed it. And it's kind of repetitive, right? Can this secondary in general, not just Murphy Bunting, but the whole secondary, keep up against this passing attack? But I think you always have to look at Zaven and Gardeck, right? Like, they have to get something up front. We joked quite a bit about the Gardeck line and things like that, and we need those half sack, 1 sack games, man. Like, we don't need the cluster 3 sack games. We need the 1 sack games with 4 quarterback pressure type games, consistently. Not that he didn't do anything last week.
He had the interception, so that was fun.
But it's just funny that they need him and Zaven to show up and contain Jane Daniels. Easier said than done. Contain Jane Daniels and give themselves a chance to make plays.
Coming up next on the Rise of Sierra podcast, Best Our Cardinals Talk on the Web. Let's move to the final segment, which is, I'm sure it's your favorite. It's everyone's favorite, where we make our predictions and we talk prop bets. That's coming up next. Rise Up Sea Red. We're back on the Rise of Sierra podcast, Best Our Cardinals Talk on the Web. Let's talk our game outcomes. We've got the Cardinals are favored by 3.5 points with the 50.5 point projected total. I see this going one of two ways. I'm going to predict that it's going to be 34-30 Cardinals, but I could totally see this being a 38-17 game Cardinals as well.
Yeah, and this is a tough one, right? 3.5. The over/under set at 50.5, so they're expecting fireworks. And I kind of wrote about this when I wrote into Hogs Haven, the SB Nation Washington Commanders site, and I said, man, this is one of those games where everybody kind of goes, oh, this is going to be a shootout, and then it ends up being a 13-10 game, right? Like, isn't that how this always goes?
Yeah.
But I'm with you on this 100%. I think I think you look at it, and I think this is a game where the Cardinals can put up points, put up numbers, and continue to play at a high level on offense. And I think they're going to get enough stops on defense. I think the Washington Commanders will punt, and I think they'll get enough stops on defense to pull out a win 31-27.
Ooh, fun. We keep both with the cover, both with the over. Now, this is where things get fun, because if we're expecting a high-scoring game, let's talk about player props. Some of these are really interesting. And what do you think on this one? Jaden Daniels over 1.5 touchdown passes is plus 140 on BetMGM. Don't you kind of think that Monday's game was kind of the breakout game for that, in that he'll probably have a couple of touchdown passes?
See, I struggle, and not disagreeing at all, but I struggle with that just because when you look at what he's done this season, he has the 2 passing touchdowns in 2 games. But one of the kind of betting issues in Cliff's offense is the amount of rushing touchdowns these guys have.
Yeah.
Right. And that's what my concern is. I could see him putting up 2 passing touchdowns and a rushing touchdown. I could see him running for or throwing for 1 and running for 2. So like that's why you take that at plus money. It's plus 142 on FanDuel.
Make a couple extra bucks to make that bet on FanDuel then.
Yeah, and it's
BetMGM's not paying me. BetMGM pays USA Today. This is a podcast that nobody pays us anything
right
for.
Right. So I like that. It's interesting because I don't have any other props other than passing props and then TD props. I don't have any rushing or receiving props yet on FanDuel.
Interesting, because there are the touchdown scorers. We don't have anything on BetMGM, but rushing yards. So we've got James Conner set at 71.5. I like the over on that. But if we're going to go alternate rushing yards at 75 plus, you get plus 110. Okay. And if you want to ladder that up to plus 100 plus, I'm tempted on this one to do a 3-way ladder there. Go the over 71.5, 75 plus at plus 110, and then 100 plus at plus 320.
Yeah, I like that a lot.
Yeah, that's a really, really good one. And then Kyler's at over 35.5 is 115, and then you can get him at plus 210 for 50 plus. And honestly, I like that one too.
Yeah, I like those as well. The one I really like, and like I said, I don't have everything yet, but the one I'm really eyeballing though is James Conner 2+ touchdowns. What is it? Do you have that on BetMGM right now? It's only plus 460 on FanDuel, so it's not great odds, but his anytime touchdown's so bad, minus 140. Like that's terrible number.
I don't have touchdown scores like anything except for total combined touchdowns between players. So you can get James Conner, Terry McLaurin over half a touchdown is minus 275. James right. Conner, Noah Brown, and basically it's a James Conner combo on everything. And so maybe this one is intriguing, but it's not great. So over 1.5 touchdowns at plus 115, combined touchdowns for James Conner and Brian Robinson.
Yeah, I like that.
That's barely plus money. This was barely plus money.
Yeah, I like that one. There's some interesting we've talked about these a little bit before. There's some interesting numbers on FanDuel if you go into scoring, and both teams to score 25 plus, which is what I have, is plus 260. So, if you're going to follow what I say, that's an interesting one to look at. And then the other one in that same vein, and remember, this is a team that's last week 38-33 went over the Bengals, right? So they're a team that gives up points, but they can score some too. And then the other one that I like, and I'm waiting to see what his total numbers are, but I would like to see Murray over. So his over-under is 230.5 on FanDuel. That's at minus 114. I like the ladder to 250 at plus 146. And I would honestly ladder that up all the way to 300 in this game. If he's going to have a 300-yard passing game, this will be the team to do it against. I know no Trey McBride, but this team is not good against the pass, man. Like,
so you can go over 229.5 on BetMGM at minus 115. Ladder that to 250 plus at plus 135, and at 300 plus it goes up to plus 450.
Oh yeah, so those are good numbers. Yeah, plus 490 on FanDuel, so it's a little better juice on FanDuel.
Yeah, if you want to play, so I've got them covering a 4-point spread, but if you think this will be more blowout-y, if you want to go with a 6.5-point spread, you can get plus 140 odds. And if you want to get really, really juicy and go with cover the 9.5, if you think that they can do a 10-point win, you can get plus 210 on a 9.5-point spread on the alternate spread if you like that.
Yeah, and that's not bad at all, right? Some of these fun ones that we're not going to be able to talk about because I don't know when these lines are going to drop. I'm assuming they're kind of waiting. Until, but I do like it, that over 50.5. We talked about that. That's a good one. But the alternate spread as well is one that if you see something you like, so for instance, right, like a Jaden Daniels, you want to go with him to have those 2+ touchdowns, and you want to get a little more juice on something like that. One of the things you can always look at, so you can do Jaden Daniels 2+ touchdowns, and then you can change, like you can go on your alternate spread, and you can put the Cardinals as like plus 5.5, so that's minus 400, and that'll get that number up to like plus 200 on the on those 2 touchdowns. So the Cardinals,
nice easy parlay it'll get you plus money,
right? And the Cardinals can lose by 6 points basically, or less than 6 points, and you're gonna cash out that. So those are some interesting ways to go about it as well if you're interested. To juice that up just a little bit. I do like I said, I do like that thought from you though on the Daniels 2+ touchdown passes.
And if you want to go with, I think it's this is a Cardinals win type parlay, and it's not crazy, but you can get plus 450 on a Cardinals minus 3.5, James Conner hitting the over 71.5, and Kyler hitting the over passing over 229.5 passing yards. That's a fairly safe parlay that you can get and get good payout at plus 450.
Yeah, and that's smart there too.
Anything else of note that y'all out there should be putting your money in for y'all degenerates out there like us?
Yeah. No, I mean, I'm excited to see what it ends up looking like once all of it comes out, because I do think that there's going to be some really juicy lines that we can find.
I really, for the sake of morale, fan morale, if the Cardinals come out and get a 10+ point win over Washington, where they score a lot of points, where it's 30-20 or 31-17 or just anything, if they win by 2 scores and score a lot of points, I think that's going to put people back into all right. And being 2-2, we both thought they would be 2-2, but looking at a pretty good 2-2 going into next week against San Francisco, a team that right now is not the same San Francisco team in terms of domination, because they are dealing with injury after injury. Defensively, lost Javon Hargrave. they're dealing with George Kittle and Deebo Samuel, and Brock Purdy's a little banged up. He has missed practice time, but maybe, just maybe, they could go into San Francisco and steal one next week. But that starts with a nice handle, like a hand where they handle the Commanders to build some momentum into next week. And if they could steal a win in San Francisco, go 2-0 in the division, 3-2 to start, then they're really, really setting themselves up for that stretch after their first 8 games where they have a slightly easier schedule.
Right, and that's kind of what we've been looking at, right, to get to that and figure out how they're where they're gonna be, and we talked about it from the beginning. They needed to be in that range where they were right around 500, getting to that stretch of games that on paper looks a little more manageable.
Yeah, and with that, we will wrap up this edition of the Rise Up C-Red podcast, Mr. Cardinals Talk on the Web, episode 595. Or did I say that already? I think we're 595 on this show. 596, episode 596. I don't know how to count, guys. Too many shows. We're almost at 600. That's a lot of shows. But Seth and I have been doing this for a long time. We will be back again next week. I'm sure we'll probably get something from Howard before we go again. So you can expect from something Howard maybe by Monday morning. And then Seth and I will be back next week to talk about how things went. And we'll see. We'll go from there. That's Seth Cox. I'm Jess Root. Thanks for listening as always. We'll be back again soon.
Thanks for listening to the latest edition of the Rise Up C-Red podcast. Listen to previous episodes and subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, Audioboom, or many other podcast platforms so shows are delivered directly to your mobile device. Please give the show a 5-star rating and always support the sponsors who support the show. We'll be back soon for the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Rise up, Red Sea, be Red C-Red, and of course, Rise Up C-Red.
Rise